Okay, well, thanks everyone for having me. So imagine for a second that it's 2002. I know that's hard for a lot of you, but try to do this, work with me here. 2002 was a very different era. Let me give you a frame of reference. There were only 4 Harry Potter books that were released by then. We were all eagerly awaiting Order of the Phoenix, the 5th book. And 2002, from a technology standpoint, was an interesting time as well. There was no Instagram, no Uber. There was also no iPhone. This was 5 years before the iPhone. So it's kind of hard for probably a lot of you to believe. But 2002 was when I was 13 years old and living in England. And that was the year when my parents decided to move us to the Bay Area. So I came here from England and got stuck in the center of Silicon Valley and was this wide-eyed teenager who got to learn about entrepreneurship and technology and venture capital and all this stuff when I was in high school. And in retrospect, that was an amazing gift. I got to use products like AIM and Gmail, Facebook, right as it was launching in high school. I learned to code in high school. I got obsessed by technology and entrepreneurship. And so when I went to college, I kind of knew from day one that I wanted to work on startups. And I became known as the Indian kid at Princeton who was building website after website. I relaunched the Entrepreneurship Club on campus, which I still think of as my first startup. And then I worked on a company called Artsy, as Avantika mentioned, that's still going today. And then at age 21, I became an intern at a venture capital firm called Insight. Bottom of the ladder, youngest person in the room. Now here I am 9 years later, and I'm very lucky to be at the managing level of my firm, Shasta Ventures, which is an early stage venture capital fund, early stage focused venture capital fund. And this article is actually out of date because I just turned 30. And so I thought for today what I would do is just reflect on the last 10 years for me, the career decisions that I've made, and try to give you all some advice that hopefully resonates. Now, how many of you are in your 20s in this room? Okay, so a few. What about under 20? Wow. So hopefully the advice that I'm going to give you is going to resonate with a lot of the folks in this room. We'll just ignore the over 30s for a second. Now, in my job as a venture capitalist, one of the amazing parts is that I get to meet inspiring, successful people every day, entrepreneurs. And when you think about successful entrepreneurs, also successful athletes, there's something that a lot of them have in common. And that's that they started young. They were able to master their craft at a young age, and they kind of developed expertise in a field from a very young age. And so when I reflected on kind of the careers of a lot of these entrepreneurs and my own career, I think there's one core element that's quite consistent that's led to the advancing of many folks' careers, and that is being the youngest person in the room. Why? Well, when you're the youngest person in the room, you're surrounded by others who have a lot more experience than you, and you can learn from them. And there are just low expectations. You aren't, expected to contribute a lot. So when you do, you can sort of surprise and delight. You also have just fewer responsibilities than the folks who are older than you. And that means that you can spend more time obsessing over something, focusing on something, getting really good at something that you're interested in. And finally, as a young person, you can bring a different perspective. You have a unique lens on the world that perhaps other people in the room don't have. And so those are all the benefits of being young. And they kind of all boil down to what I think of as infinite upside. You just can't lose when you're young. And that's why being the youngest in the room is so valuable. So there are 4 pieces of career advice related to being the youngest in the room that I want to give you. The first is that you have to get yourself in the room to be the youngest in that room. And to do that, I think you just have to be opportunistic. When I look at my own career, the first startup that I worked on in college, I actually met my co-founder because he took my math textbook freshman year. And then I called his cell phone, and his voicemail said that he was president and CEO of a company called Postcard Tech. And when I went to retrieve my textbook from him, we started talking about his startup. And that kind of one thing led to another, and then we ended up working together. With Shasta, this is our team, I've been the youngest person in the room for almost my whole time at the firm. And I was opportunistic again, where I got to meet a couple of my partners early on, a couple of years before I ended up joining the firm. And so you have to figure out how to get yourself in the room. Second, once you're there, you have to be curious. Ask questions, learn as much as you can about a subject. For me, I just obsessed over startups, and I sort of researched and read about companies throughout college. That baseline knowledge that I started developing a decade ago still helps me in my job today. And this is a photo of Bill Gates. Bill Gates started programming when he was 13, and then after his freshman year of college, he and his friend Paul Allen started working at Honeywell as interns. And Bill in particular was the youngest person in the room for that whole summer at Honeywell. There he learned what it was like to work at a company. And the following year, he and Paul decided to drop out of Harvard to start their own company that they called Microsoft. And that leads into this third point, which is you have to work on your own projects. In my opinion, college is just the best time to work on your own startup. Because, again, as I said before, you kind of have nothing to lose. And by working on your own projects, you sort of start to develop intuition around what really gets you passionate, what really matters to you. And my own projects kind of led, again, from one thing to another. They led to a company that's still going today, but they also led to some lifelong relationships. And the same is true for people like Mark Zuckerberg, who's pictured here coding on Facebook out of his dorm room. And finally, you have to have a North Star metric, I think, for your career. For me, that metric is waking up every day excited to get to work. And one of the reasons that that's the case is that I get to wake up every day and meet with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs like the woman pictured here, Deepika Bodhapati. Deepika actually took all 4 pieces of career advice that I laid out here. First, she got herself in the room by working at a lab when she was in high school. She was the youngest person in that lab, and she started to learn about imaging blood samples. She then was curious enough to develop expertise in that field to become one of the experts in the imaging of blood. And then she went off and started to work on her own projects. And she dropped out of USC to work on a startup called Nikhils, which has now raised money from folks like Y Combinator, Sequoia Capital, and yes, Shasta Ventures. And Deepika today wakes up every day excited to get to work because she's working on a problem that she's incredibly driven to solve, which is bringing life-changing healthcare solutions to the world. So again, get yourself in the room, be curious, work on your own projects, wake up every day excited to get to work, and be the youngest person in the room. Go craft your journey until one day you'll be the oldest person in the room, standing in front of you all. Thank you very much.